The Galactic Council chamber erupted into laughter, a booming cacophony of amusement that echoed across the grand hall. Representatives from 100 species, some towering and insectoid, others sleek and reptilian, shook their heads, chittered, or rumbled in their native tongues. At the center of it all stood the human delegation, their expressions unreadable, their stance unwavering. The laughter wasn't unexpected. Humanity had been the punchline of galactic politics for years. Weak, primitive, unfit to govern. That was the label slapped onto their species the moment they first made contact. And now, here they were, standing before the most powerful governing body in the known universe, daring to challenge the status quo. One of the council's elder members, a wizened being with deep-set eyes and skin like polished stone, leaned forward with a grin that did nothing to hide his condescension. "You request representation beyond your current standing?" His voice carried the weight of centuries. "You wish to sit among the ruling seats of the Senate? What, pray tell, have you done to warrant such authority?" More laughter followed, but this time there was an edge to it, a nervousness buried beneath the mockery. They laughed because they had to. Because the alternative, the idea that humans could be more than what they assumed, was far too unsettling to consider. The lead human delegate took a slow step forward, the polished floor reflecting their determined gaze. "You ask what we have done?" they said, voice calm, almost amused. "Very well. Let's begin with the wars you could not win." The room fell into an uneasy hush. It was subtle, but the shift in atmosphere was there, a slight tightening in the postures of those who'd once lounged in amusement. "The Vashti uprising," the human continued, "which you deemed unwinnable until we sent our advisors. The Red Moon conflict, which you declared lost before our fleets intervened. The economic collapse of the Kelsar Dominion, who pulled you back from the brink." A murmur spread through the chamber. These were not secrets, but no one had dared to say them aloud, not like this. The council had always downplayed humanity's involvement, crediting their victories to unexpected variables or unorthodox methods. But here, in the heart of their own domain, those truths were being laid bare, and the weight of them was undeniable. One of the reptilian diplomats clicked their sharp teeth together, a nervous tick disguised as irritation. "You act as though this proves your worth," they hissed. "You were tools, nothing more. You were given instructions. You followed them well. That does not make you leaders." The human let a small, knowing smile form. "Then why do your fleets model our strategies?" A flick of the wrist activated a holographic display, showing military formations unmistakably adapted from human tactics. "Why do your academies teach our theories? Why do your own soldiers wear armor based on our designs?" Silence. No one had an answer, not one they were willing to say aloud. The truth was simple. The moment humans had entered the galactic stage, everything had changed. They had been underestimated at first, treated as little more than a curiosity, but time and necessity had forced the Council's hand. Humanity had been needed. Again and again. And now, that debt was being called in. The elder counselor's expression remained unreadable, but there was something new in his gaze, something that had not been there before: calculation. "You assume much," he said finally. "Influence in war does not equate to governance." The human delegate stepped forward once more, placing a single data slate onto the council's central podium. "Then perhaps it's time you understand exactly what we've built," they said. "What we control. What we could do if we wanted." The counselor hesitated before reaching out and activating the slate. A new projection flickered into existence above the chamber: trade routes, economic leverage points, supply chains spanning across the entire galactic network. But more than that, there were names. Allies. Worlds that had, quietly and without fanfare, pledged loyalty not to the council, but to humanity. The realization spread through the room like a slow-burning fire. "You thought of us as tools," the delegate said, voice quiet but unshakable. "You thought you could use us and discard us when convenient. But tools do not learn. Tools do not adapt. Tools do not." They gestured toward the display, letting the evidence speak for itself, reshape the very foundations of power. The elder counselor sat back, clasping his hands together in thought. The laughter was gone. The arrogance, the dismissal, it had all evaporated into something colder, something that looked an awful lot like fear. "You were never just tools," the human said, stepping away from the podium. "And now it's too late to pretend otherwise." The chamber remained deathly silent, save for the quiet hum of the holographic display. In that stillness, one thing became clear: the game had already changed. Humanity had not come to ask for power. They had come to take it. The elder counselor exhaled slowly, his stone-like fingers tapping against the podium in measured contemplation. Around the chamber, the other representatives remained locked in stunned silence, their gazes shifting between the holographic display and the human delegation. This was not how today was supposed to unfold. The humans were meant to make their petition, receive their condescending rejection, and slink back to their insignificant corner of the galaxy. That was the script, the way things had always been. But now, as the weight of their influence became impossible to ignore, the chamber felt different, heavier. As if, for the first time, the council was realizing that the balance of power had already tipped. From the outer rows of the chamber, a soft murmur began to rise. Some voices carried confusion, others frustration. A few held something even more dangerous: curiosity. The humans had always been a divisive topic among the higher echelons of power. To some, they were an anomaly, a species that had clawed its way into relevance through sheer unpredictability. To others, they were a growing problem, an unchecked force creeping into places they had no business being. But there was another group, a quiet faction that had been watching humanity's rise with careful interest. They were the ones who saw potential, opportunity, the ones who had begun to whisper behind closed doors that perhaps an alliance with Earth would not be a surrender, but an evolution. A serpentine diplomat, her gleaming black eyes unreadable, coiled slightly in her seat before speaking. "Your words hold weight, but weight alone does not grant authority." Her voice was soft, calculated. "You speak of influence, but influence is a shifting tide. Tell me, do you truly believe that should this council decide to act against you, you would remain standing?" The threat was veiled, almost elegant in its delivery, but the meaning was clear. There were those in this chamber who would rather crush humanity now than allow this challenge to fester. The human delegate didn't flinch. "Act against us?" A small, knowing smile tugged at their lips. "And risk war? Chaos? Perhaps even collapse?" Their tone was not arrogant, nor overtly aggressive. It was simply factual, a statement of reality that hung over the room like a storm cloud. "You assume this is a negotiation," the human continued, their eyes sweeping across the room. "It is not. It is a courtesy." The chamber darkened for a brief moment as the holographic display shifted once more, this time revealing something far more alarming than trade routes and political alliances. Defense networks, strategic weaknesses, the gaps in the Council's own control. The data was not absolute, but it was enough to send a ripple of unease through the room. The implications were clear: humanity had been watching, studying, preparing. Somewhere in the chamber, a voice hissed a curse in an alien tongue. Another delegate stood so quickly that their chair scraped against the floor. The illusion of control had shattered, and in its place was something none of them were prepared for: uncertainty. The elder counselor leaned forward once more, his expression unreadable. "You tread dangerous ground," he said at last. The human delegate met his gaze without hesitation. "So do you." A long silence stretched between them. Then, for the first time in centuries, the counselor found himself unsure of what would happen next. Far beyond the chamber, across the vast expanse of space, the repercussions of this moment were already in motion. Hidden factions, long buried beneath the weight of tradition, began shifting their allegiances. Fleets stationed on the borders of human-controlled space sent encrypted messages back to their homeworlds, uncertain whether their next orders would be to stand down or strike first. And somewhere in the depths of the galactic core, where shadows moved unseen and whispers dictated the fates of entire civilizations, a message was sent to a place that did not officially exist. It contained only a single line: "The humans are no longer asking." A flicker of movement broke the tense silence in the chamber as a delegation seated near the outer edges of the hall stood abruptly. Their robes, marked with the insignia of the Kelsar Dominion, rippled as they stepped forward, their expressions unreadable. The Kelsar had been among the oldest members of the Council, one of the first empires to claim dominance over vast regions of space. But, more importantly, they were one of the many civilizations that had once scoffed at humanity until their entire economy had nearly collapsed, only to be stabilized by human intervention. The lead Kelsari representative, a tall figure with bioluminescent veins pulsing faintly beneath their translucent skin, turned their gaze toward the human delegation. "We acknowledge the truth in your words," they said, their voice carrying an almost unnatural calm. "Your kind has shaped events in ways we did not anticipate. But influence does not equate to stability." Their glowing eyes flicked toward the display of vulnerabilities still shimmering above the chamber. "If you are as formidable as you claim, then you must understand what you risk by forcing the Council's hand." The human delegate remained still. "You misunderstand," they said, voice even. "We are not forcing your hand. We are showing you that it was never on the controls to begin with." The Kelsari hesitated, just long enough for a second representative to rise this time from the opposite side of the chamber. They belonged to the Vashti, a warlike species that had once seen humans as nothing more than disposable shock troops in their endless territorial skirmishes. The Vashti had underestimated them, as so many had. And like the others, they had paid the price for that mistake. The Vashti diplomat let out a sharp exhale, their mandibles clicking together. "Perhaps they are right," they admitted, drawing a few startled looks from their own side. "Perhaps we are no longer the ones dictating the terms of this galaxy. The question is," their multifaceted eyes locked onto the humans, "do you intend to rule it?" The weight of the question settled over the room like a dense fog. This was the fear beneath all the posturing, the quiet dread humming beneath the surface. Humanity was no longer just a growing force, they had embedded themselves into the very structure of the galactic order. And now, they stood at the threshold of something far greater than influence. The human delegate finally took a step forward, letting the moment stretch before answering. "We did not come here to conquer," they said, their voice deliberate. "We came because the system you built is crumbling under its own weight. You fear us because we are proof that the old ways no longer work." A glance swept across the chamber, meeting the eyes of those who had once jeered at their presence. "You asked if we intend to rule?" They let a small pause linger. "We don't need to." As those words sank in, a sharp chime rang through the chamber, an emergency transmission overriding all non-essential communications. The elder counselor's gaze snapped toward the central interface, his expression darkening as he read the incoming data. Others soon followed, their faces shifting from confusion to something closer to alarm. Across the entire galactic network, key outposts were reporting the same anomaly: massive disruptions in encrypted channels, unauthorized access points appearing in secure databases, and an overwhelming surge of information leaks. Something was tearing through the Council's most classified systems, like they were made of paper. The human delegate watched the reactions with quiet understanding. "It seems," they said, "that you have a much bigger problem than us." The elder counselor's fingers curled into a fist. "What have you done?" A flicker of genuine amusement crossed the human's face. "This isn't us." And for the first time in the history of the Council, the greatest threat in the room was no longer humanity. A warning siren blared through the chamber, its sharp tone cutting through the tense silence like a blade. Delegates scrambled to access their private terminals, desperate for more information, but every encrypted channel, every classified system they once believed impenetrable, was collapsing under an unseen force. The elder counselor's gaze snapped toward the human delegation, but for the first time that day, his expression wasn't one of contempt or skepticism, it was fear. Across the room, a technician's voice cracked over the emergency communication line. "We have full-scale breaches in central databases across multiple sectors. Something is overriding critical protocols, pulling intelligence files, altering security access." A sudden pause. Then, a shaky breath. "We just lost control of our primary defense grid." That single statement sent a ripple of shock through the Council. The defense grid was the backbone of their authority, a vast network of automated fleets and planetary shields designed to protect the core worlds from external threats. And now, it was in the hands of an unknown force. The Council had ruled for millennia under the assumption that they were untouchable. But in mere moments, that illusion had shattered. The human delegate remained still, watching the unraveling chaos with a quiet intensity. When they finally spoke, their voice was measured. "We told you your system was collapsing." A slight tilt of the head. "Did you think we were only talking about politics?" The elder counselor's fingers dug into the edge of his podium. "You said this wasn't your doing." The human met his gaze. "It isn't." Before the counselor could respond, the central display flickered violently before stabilizing, only this time. It was no longer showing the list of vulnerabilities humanity had exposed. Instead, an unfamiliar symbol pulsed in the air above them, a twisting design of interwoven lines, shifting and morphing as though it were alive. The delegates stared, recognition dawning in the eyes of those who had studied ancient threats, long-buried warnings from forgotten wars. A voice smooth yet devoid of emotion echoed through the chamber. Observation complete. Somewhere in the chamber, a delegate whispered in horror, "No, it's them." The human delegate exhaled slowly. So it was true. The elder counselor's focus snapped toward them. "You knew?" "Suspected," the human admitted, eyes never leaving the glowing symbol. "We found fragments in lost records. Mentions of something watching, waiting." A pause. "Something that didn't see you as rulers. Only test subjects." The voice returned, calm and absolute. "Galactic governance has failed its sustainability parameters. Unchecked expansion, internal decay, escalating inefficiencies." The lines of the symbol pulsed. "Projected collapse within 3 standard cycles. Correction protocol initiated." The chamber was deathly silent. Then, the defense grid logs updated fleet deployments shifting, automated sentries recalibrating, but not against a known enemy. They were turning inward. The realization struck hard and fast. The Council wasn't under attack. They were being replaced. Panic erupted. Some delegates tried to flee. Others shouted desperate commands into communication devices that no longer obeyed them. It was chaos, the kind only seen when those who once held absolute power realized they had never truly owned it to begin with. The human delegate remained still, watching it unfold. Then, with a final glance at the elder counselor, they spoke the words that sealed the fate of the galaxy. "This is why we came." And as the council crumbled, as the ancient force tightened its grip around the civilizations that had believed themselves untouchable, only humanity stood ready to rewrite what came next.